I was thrilled when Roy said, I think we can get Jack Cashill here. I said, you got to be kidding me, because I read Jack on World Net Daily, and I love the style of writing he utilizes in his article. And by the way, he has a PhD in history from Purdue University. I'm so glad it's not from Harvard or Cornell. So Jack has done a lot of writing. I've heard about him, and it's great to have him here in person. And I think one of the subjects he's really going to talk about or focus in on is a book he has up front. Let me show you real quick. Barack Obama's Promised Land. Deplorables Need Not Apply. So I'm, again, really looking forward to having him share with us. And while he speaks, this guy is very well written and knowledgeable on a whole field of subjects. So Jack, welcome. Glad you are here.
Mel, you're a former televangelist, is that right? Or is it just, you guys impressive. I want to thank Roy and Karen for inviting me, and I have friends here who I've seen over the years. In my travels, 5 years ago, in fact, I remember it was 2016, it was during the election season, in 1 week, I spoke at I was on a panel, I should say, at an event sponsored by a PBS station in Kansas City, where I live, about Muslims in our metro. I thought it was Muslims on the metro, which is a bus. I didn't figure out why that was the subject, but it was Muslims in the metro. I was on a panel. And then that same week, later that week, I spoke at a Tea Party group in Clinton County, Missouri, which is, its county seat is 10 miles off the interstate. So, you really have to, it's a rural county. Here's the 5 things they had at Clinton County that they do not have at any liberal event I've ever been at or spoken at. First of all, is a prayer to begin the meeting. They don't do that. Secondly, is a pledge. They don't do that. Now, in Clinton County, they also had something else that I had never seen at any liberal meeting, and that was they had the 5th place winner, the national 5th place winner, and the Future Farmers of America talent competition play Star Spangled Banner on a harmonica. Now, that was, he was brilliant. It was great. Here's the 4th thing that you'll never see at any liberal meeting anywhere: a gun raffle. The last time I spoke to this group, they had and I guess they've gotten, they had claims that people were accusing them of sexism, because they had a gun raffle for the boys and a knife raffle for the girls. So it's, you can imagine what those dating is like in Clinton County. And the 5th thing they had at Clinton County that they did not have at the Muslim thing was meat, for dinner. So, in this case, it was served by the actual kids who grew the beef and probably slaughtered it as well. So thank you for having me here. I had, Mel wanted to talk. I want to talk about critical race theory because it's much in the news, and I had an experience this past week. I'm from New Jersey originally, and this past week, as we do every year, my extended family meets together down the shore for a week, and there are at least 50 of us this year. It's a big extended family. Now, last month, Barack Obama was on Anderson Cooper, and he was talking about the problems besetting America, and he was mocking us. And he was saying that, I don't know why they're not worrying about things that we worry about, like the economy and global warming. More about global warming in a second. Climate change, rather. That global warming's out. And now, lo and behold, this is the phrase used, lo and behold, they think that the greatest thing challenging America now is, the greatest threat to America right now is critical race theory. And I have an article in today's American Spectator. I don't know if anyone reads that online, but the article was titled, "Critical Race Theory is not only a threat to the nation, it's a threat to our families." And let me explain how this works. In my family, its core members are Irish. The Cashills are potato famine Irish, came over in Black 47. My mother's side came later, about 40 years later. They both came from Ireland. That's the core of our family. But people have been marrying into it for years. And, the first Germans, and, in fact, you scratch an Irishman, you're going to find a German in a woodpile someplace, and, at least in New Jersey. I don't know about elsewhere. Then Italians. That ruffled some feathers when that happened. Like, that was 70 years ago, though. But since then, our family's become, just like so many American families, especially in the East, where there's a lot of influx. We had, at the event, spouses who were born in Brazil, born in India, born in Japan. We had spouses whose parents had been born in Haiti, in the Ukraine, in Ireland. So now all these little cousins play together happily and freely. They're all growing up in two-parent families. They're all growing up comfortably. My family skews to the right, but that's not exclusively so. And yet, what's going to happen down the road? Well, first of all, when they get to school, these kids will be told, some of these kids will be told they're oppressed, and some of them will be told they're the oppressors. Even though they grow up in the exact same family with the same cousins, same aunts, uncles, grandparents. When they get to apply to college, some of them will get scholarships and some of them won't. And how does that work when cousins get together then, and they know then that some are being screwed and some are being unscrewed, I guess, whatever. And then they apply for jobs, and the same thing holds true. So it's causing already friction in families. It will cause even more friction if the agents of CRT get a foothold. Barack Obama had a chance to stop this idiocy, and it's in the womb, and he didn't. And I'll tell you why. It's a really interesting story that the media will never tell you about, and that is that his book, his 2020 memoir, A Promised Land, is in many ways a pay-on to the virtues of family. He may be I'm trying to think of the word, a nice word, I know I'm being recorded. He may not be a great guy in every which way, but I think he's a good family man. He really seems to love his children, and he bizarrely even loves his wife. And yes, she is a woman. Sorry to disappoint you, but I know Joan Rivers went to her grave saying otherwise, but she's a woman. So he knows the value of family. He grew up without a family. He grew up actually in a white household, of course, with a white mother and white grandparents, and by the way, if you recall, he was perfectly willing to throw that grandmother under the bus to salvage his campaign in 2008, because she was, and the critical race theory teaches us that, no matter how loving she was, and she was 85 years old and on her deathbed, he had to say, and she said cringeworthy racist things, and complained about being hassled by a huge panhandler. That made her a racist. He equated her with Jeremiah Wright. That's, if you remember that. But here's what he said on Father's Day in June 2008 at an Apostolic Church of God in downtown Chicago. He gave the kind of speech that you would like your elected officials to give. And he's calling me right now. That's the NSA calling in. They're concerned about this meeting. But he's speaking to this church congregation. And by the way, liberals can speak to church congregations without crossing the line of separation of church and state. We can't, they can. So he's talking to them, and he says, the greatest problem plaguing our community today is fathers acting more like boys than men. Fathers abandoning their homes. Fathers abandoning their children. Fathers, leaving these kids to grow up in the streets. And then he goes, look at the results. You know what happens to boys in fatherless homes? He goes through the statistics, and they're right. 10 times more, I don't remember exact numbers, but yeah. I'll tell you what happened very shortly thereafter. 10 times more likely to end up in prison. 15 times more likely to drop out of school. 20 times more likely to end up in poverty, etc. If Alan Keyes had given that speech, we would have been happy with it. It was exactly the kind of speech he should be given. And he was the only one capable of giving that speech because he at least resembles an African American, at least an authentic African American. And that's his problem. he's not authentic. He grew up in a white household, in a, with white grandparents, white mother, and in the least black state in the Union. He comes to the mainland and as an 18-year-old, and all he knows about black culture is what he's seen on the Jeffersons and the Mod Squad. Can you imagine how frightening that must be, Because you look like you belong, but you don't. And they know it. They know it. And so throughout his life, the first 25 or so years of his life, he played at being this exotic, flower from Kenya, right? And he was the first birther, you know this. And when he was an aspiring author, the guide put out by his literary agency has Barack Obama, born in Kenya, raised in Hawaii. 20 years later, they said that was a clerical error, nonsense. A clerical error says you were born in Kenda. It doesn't say you're born in Kenya. And that they stayed on their website until he started running for president. I think he was lying, by the way. I don't think he was born in Kenya. And I'll explain why I think they fought the birth certificate. But he gets up and he gives this speech. 3 weeks later, boy, the media do not want to talk about this. And in his book, Obama doesn't talk about it, although it was the turning point of his presidency. 3 weeks later, Jesse Jackson, who is an authentic African American, no one asked him for his birth certificate because we knew he was American. He may not be our favorite American, but no one doubted that he was American. And at that time, in 2008, he still had considerable clout. He would yield that to, bizarrely, Al Sharpton, but more on Al in a minute. He's in a Fox News studio in New York. He's in his studio. They're allegedly off mic, but there's a hot mic. The mic is on, as if he didn't know this. And he's doing it in Fox, the one news studio where what he says might just leak, and it does. Here's what he says, and it's captured on video. And this is a little crude. Bear with me. He goes, I'll cut the N-word out, but I'll use the other N-word. You'll see what I mean in a second. Barack Obama, he'd been talking down to them N-words, right? Except that, of course, Jesse Jackson doesn't speak in asterisk like we have to. He says, I want to cut his nuts out, right? That's exactly what he says. And he makes this slashing motion.
See Barack been talking down to black people on those faith-based and see Barack been talking down to black people on those faith-based and
like he's serious. I mean, he grew up on a farm. He probably knows what he's talking about. That was the last time Barack Obama ever talked about fatherless children. So he's a couple days later, Obama's on a campaign plane, and the press sort of timidly asked him about this. One press person, probably a person from Fox, and Obama says, well, I talked to Jesse, and I agree that, yes, fatherhood is a problem, but so is systemic racism, and we could talk about both, except we don't. From that point on, we just talk about systemic racism. In his book, he's been fully captured. Now, they talk about, Michelle is his race whisperer. She's always whispering in his ear. They hate us. I mean, literally. They fear us. They're all racist. Every criticism is race-related. So the net result of this all has not been very helpful for the nation. And things began, for instance, in 2009 at the inauguration, 64% of black Americans said the race relations are good and getting better. By 2016, 61% said they were bad and getting worse. And this was totally due to Barack Obama, totally due to his racializing everything. And he didn't have to do it, and he knew better. But he did it anyhow. Let me just give you one example of how it works. And what I'd like to do with this period is not talk too long, but take questions, get to hear what you want to say, because I always find that more interesting anyhow. Michelle Obama, and I think this was in early 2012, you may remember this, she goes shopping incognito at a Target in Northern Virginia, dressed like an ordinary housewife, with the Secret Service removed so that she could pass. And she does pass. She's walking through, and here's what she tells David Letterman about the experience in March 2012. You can look this up because it's a fascinating contrast. So she tells David Letterman, she goes, she's laughing, having a good time, saying, "Oh boy, what a trip this was. I get to go and I'm walking around and no one recognizes me." And David Letterman says, "No one?" She goes, "No one recognized me. It's so much fun." And then finally this woman approaches me. And I said, "Oh, dang, my cover's blown." I'm thinking to myself. And then she comes up to me and says, "Ma'am, could you reach up on that shelf and get me a can of soap, And then Michelle laughs. She goes, "She's a little woman. Michelle's nearly 6 feet tall." And she says, and I gave it to her, and my cover wasn't blown. No one recognized me. She goes, "I had such a good time." That's what she says, literally. And then Letterman reiterates this. No one recognized you? No one, right? Okay, fast forward 2 years. Ferguson has come down, Now we're getting ready for the 2014 midterms. And they had to mobilize the base now on the basis of race. So she and Barack Obama are being interviewed. Barack is sitting there right next to her. He had a chance to challenge this. He doesn't. And the article that the people interview, and they had the quote, so it's not like it was all recorded. They said, Michelle, they ask her, are you still, attacked by a racist? She goes, "Yeah. And let me give you an example," she says. "You remember that time I went to Target, right?" She goes, "There I was, shopping barely disguised, right? And this woman comes up to me, and she says, she treats me like the help. She says, 'Can you get that thing off the shelf for me?'" Right? And now we presume, she doesn't say it, but we presume this woman is white. And it was the most outrageous lie, and it was so pernicious. Because, black women reading this say they have this beaten into their heads at every opportunity. They hate you. They're going to treat you badly. Every time you get cut off in traffic, it's because you're black. Every time you get a ticket, it's because you're black. Every time you get fired, it's because you're black. I mean, this is repeated. Obama was smart enough to know better because he had never been treated that way. He had to make up stuff. And even his mainstream biographer said this guy's writing fiction. He's creating racial incidents that never happened. In his memoir, he says, "I remember the time." He goes, "When I could walk across the street in Chicago, dressed in a suit, and hear the sound of cars clicking, locks clicking." Right? That's just such utter. That's Jesse Smollett-sized paranoia. Anyhow, that's the way they roll. And that's the way we're kind of in this shape we're in today. And a lot of this has to do with the fact that Obama never knew who he was, never got a grip on who he was. And so he turned to the race whisperers. First, Jesse Jackson, then to his wife, Michelle. In fact, he married her to root himself in authentic African-American community. And finally, to probably the most influential person during the Obama presidency, and this is painful to admit, but this gentleman visited the White House officially 72 times. And that was Al Sharpton. I mean, it's pathetic, right? This guy's a clown. We think he's a clown. By the way, just reading today, he still owes $800,000 from the time he ran for president in 2004. No one asked him for his birth certificate. Okay, one last note, and then I'll turn over questions. Why did Barack Obama fight so hard to resist sharing his birth certificate? What I did is I went into I've read all the mainstream biographers. Sometimes you have to do that. And even though the good ones couch their criticism, they sometimes tell the truth, especially David Garrow, who is the last of them, who wrote a book called Rising Star in 2017. He's Pulitzer Prize winner. So is David Marinus, Pulitzer Prize winner. David Remnick, Pulitzer Prize winner. They're all named David. All his biographers, David Mendel. His four main biographers are all named David. Any Davids here? You want to write a book? Oh, there's David, yeah. It's your turn to write the new Obama biography, David. But, so here's what I discovered is that, and some of you know some of this, is that the first person to file a serious lawsuit against Barack Obama was a fellow named Philip Berg, who was a Democrat attorney, a deputy attorney general in the state of Pennsylvania, challenged Bob Casey for the governorship in Democratic primary and ran credibly. So when he launched, and he was a Hillary supporter, this is 2008. When he launches his lawsuit, he expects the media to take him seriously. Of course, they don't. But Obama and the DNC do. They hire their top guns from the go-to Democrat deep state law firm, and some of you will have heard of this firm, Perkins Coie. And so at the time, people said Perkins Coie, who's Perkins Coie? They don't think about it. This is top dollar law firm. They're spending a gazillion dollars because Berg isn't the only one. After a year, he gets his suit thrown out. Bob Bauer, the attorney for Perkins Coie who fought the lawsuit, gets named White House counsel immediately upon the suits being settled. So let's fast forward 2 years. The suits continue. They continue spending goo-gobs of money to resist it. And then, bless his heart, Donald Trump wanders in and gives him grief, you know. And Trump has never said he was born in Kenya. Never said it. The media desperately tried to create the notion that he said this and it was a racist thing to say. But as I said, no one ever questioned Al Sharpton. No one ever questioned Jesse Jackson. They didn't question Barack Obama because he was black. They questioned him because neither of his parents spent any time in America. And we know that his father was not an American citizen. In fact, both of them hated America. And Obama, didn't get to the mainland until he was 18. So there was reason to question it. And in fact, Hillary's strategy in 2008 was, and her pollster, Mark Penn, said as much, is to question his Americanness. They did it a little more subtly than saying, he was born in Kenya, but they questioned it anyhow. We also know that his life story was a cock-up. As early as 2008, Michael Patrick Leahy, who's from this area, does anyone know Michael? He wrote a book, a self-published book saying, Tracking Obama's Early Life. The New York Times newsroom knows more about George Washington's first couple years than they know about Barack Obama's. Literally. They know where Barack Obama spent the first year of his life. They know where Washington spent the first year of his life, which was Virginia. They don't know. If you asked them today, where did Obama spend the first year of his life? They'd say, Hawaii? No. The answer is, most of you know, Seattle, Washington. In fact, he lived in Capitol Hill, just right outside the gates of the famed autonomous zone. You think they would have talked about that when Chaz was much in the news? They didn't. So in 2011, Trump makes so much noise that they've got to do something. Plus, Jerry Corsi has a book coming out, Where's the Birth Certificate? And which promises to sell a lot of copies. And a friend of mine, Terry Lakin, is about ready to be released from Leavenworth, the stockade, where he spent 6 months. He sacrificed his entire military career to get the birth certificate out. So there's a lot of pressure building. So who did they send to Hawaii to get the birth certificate? Perkins Coie, right? And Bob Bauer is leading it from inside the White House now. They send other Perkins Coie lawyers to produce the birth certificate. The birth certificate is produced. Now, 5 years later, Perkins Coie shows up in the news when they produce the Steele dossier, right? And I'm just saying that a law firm that was capable of producing the Steele dossier is capable of dumbing up a birth certificate. That's no big deal. But what were they fighting? What were they trying to hide? Here's my theory. And I'm speculating now, but I'd say this is the best theory I've been able to come up with because I've read everything. He wasn't born in Kenya. That doesn't make any sense. He was most likely born in Hawaii. Now, here's a fact that the mainstream, all the Davids, all the Pulitzer Prize winning Davids, cannot quite agree on. They agree that Ann Dunham, his mother, grew up in Seattle, not Kansas, as Obama was always saying, but that in the summer of 1960, for no really good reason, the family uproots itself and moves to Hawaii, right? At the time, Anne was a 17-year-old wild child. She'd already run away from home. She'd already expressed an interest in this film, Black Orpheus, whose hero is an African, a Brazilian African. And this would embarrass Obama later on when she talked about this, how moved she was by the movie she saw when she was 16. Now, in 1960, by the way, the breadwinner in the family, the mother, the grandmother, Madeline, worked at a bank, would go on to become a bank vice president. The grandfather, Stanley, was something of a loser. The cover story is that they moved to Hawaii so he could get a job in a furniture store. Now, Anne didn't want to go. Madeline didn't want to go. We know that. And Stanley went because he wanted to work on a furniture store. Now, let's back up to 1960. Some of you remember 1960. Now, my grandparents told me about 1960, but so I'll just have to go on what they told me. No, I was there. I'm sorry. I'm just kidding. In fact, at my family reunion, this is classic 1960s story, showing up, thanks to the wonders of Ancestry.com and DNA test, was one of my cousin's newfound cousin, because the woman who lived next door to me married my uncle, but her younger daughter apparently had an affair with a married man across the street. And so in 1963, she went away, as women did at that time, because you can't sit around and be pregnant if you don't have a father. She goes away. She comes back later, the baby's been put up for adoption, and now, 48 years later, he finds his way back to his family. It's an incredible story, but it happens every day. That was what women did in 1960. If you were pregnant with a black father, where would you go? Well, there's only one state in the Union at that time where the child of a mixed marriage could grow up without a whole lot of stigma, was Hawaii. And so they go to Hawaii. I am strongly of the opinion, and it makes sense of all the other facts that fall into place, is that Anne was pregnant when she went to Hawaii. I believe Barack Obama was born in February of 1961. By the way, his 60th birthday is probably next week. You can have a celebration here, right? August 4th. I believe that, so then you say, well, why would they go to all this trouble to conceal it if he was actually born in February? And just some other pieces of the puzzle that fall into place. Barack Obama Sr. was an African exchange student who needed to extend his visa, his INS documentation. We have all that. They knew he was a rogue. Now he shows up with a pregnant HAPA American wife, and he gets an extra year to study. It's a total package for him. He's got it in him. When he leaves finally for Harvard, by the way, they never spent a night under the same roof, this couple. We know that now. When Barack Obama Sr. leaves for Harvard a year later, here he is in a picture with his arm around his best buddy, Stanley Dunham, right? I'm sorry. If an African guy knocks up my 17-year-old daughter in 1960, we are never going to be best buddies. But Obama served his role. We also know that Anne went to college her first year at the University of Hawaii. She would have been 3, 4, 5 months, 6, 8, 7 months pregnant. And a muumuu covers a lot of sins. But she doesn't go to second semester when she would have arguably only been 2 months pregnant at the beginning of that semester. So all those facts fall into place. We also know that she shows up in Seattle with a baby in late August of '61, just weeks before she enrolls at the University of Washington. By the way, the New York Times newsroom knows none of this, about where she goes, how she gets, blah, blah, blah. There's no pictures of her pregnant. There are no photos of a newborn baby. But she shows up with a baby that would have been no more than 2-3 weeks old. And that means you had to fly by yourself from Hawaii to Seattle with a 2 or 3. I don't think that happened. I mean, it makes much more sense. She'd been much more prudent had the baby been, say, 6 months old. So what are they hiding? Here's what I think happens. In his memoir, first one, 1995, Dreams from My Father, Obama writes that he was, Barack Obama's his father, and he was 2 years old when the father leaves home, blah, blah, blah. It's the story he's been fed from his childhood. Now when he goes to run for president, he just keeps saying the same story, 2 years old, father, blah, blah, blah. At 2004, when he gives his keynote convention speech, which was the breakthrough moment for Barack Obama, he spends the first 3 paragraphs on his father. My father was a goat herder in Kenya, blah, blah, blah. He meets my mother, who's a farm girl from Kansas, and she's a little hippie child from Seattle, and they fall in love. They have this improbable love, this incredible multicultural romance, and they have this great faith in America and in my future. This is all fiction. He probably doesn't know it's fiction in 2004, or at least he knows some of it's BS, but not total fiction. And then he runs for president. Well, his campaign manager, David Axelrod, another David, they're all over him. See, David? You got to get out there. Axelrod was responsible. He's a dumpster diver. Axelrod was responsible in 2004 for unsealing the records of Barack Obama's Senate primary candidate, and then unsealing the records of his Republican candidate in the 2004 election, the original, not Alan Keyes. And they both had sexual peccadillos in their background, divorces, etc. So he's a dumpster diver. And the first thing you do for your candidate is you dive into his dumpster, your own candidate's dumpster. I think he finds out when he gets into the dumpster that Barack Obama, you have a problem. You weren't born in August 1961. Obama said, why is that a problem? Repeal your childhood of this multiracial, international, improbable love, all gone. Your mom was knocked up by some black guy in Seattle. We don't even know who he is, right? That's the message that goes back. You kill his whole image. He's no longer Barack Obama. He's no longer a guy with the roots in Africa. He's just another, poor child abandoned by his black father. And that is what I think is at the heart of why they fought so hard to conceal this birth certificate. It's the one variable that makes sense of all the others. And what also happens is that as soon as he's elected president, he totally throws his whole African family under the bus. His aunt dies, and he won't pay to have her shipped back to Africa. She dies in Boston. Malik Obama, in 2016, votes for Donald Trump. Malik Obama was his best man at Obama's wedding. Obama was the best man at Malik's wedding. He didn't need these people anymore, and because he knew they weren't even his relatives anymore. So anyhow, that's my story. I'm going to stick to it. And I'm going to, at this point, take questions because I think that's more interesting. Yes, sir.
One question and a comment.
Sure.
The birth certificate that was shown, I don't really care about it, it's past stuff, but showed that he was born in April, and this is from Hawaii, and they listed his race as black. Now, that term and the terminology was never used.
African. They listed his race as African.
Something of it.
Yeah.
That was not the terminology used, as I understand it.
Right.
That would have been very unusual, so kind of weird. But my comment was this. So Barack Obama was a child of Axelrod, or not Axelrod. Who's the other guy there from University of Chicago? You know who I'm talking about?
Bill Ayers.
Bill Ayers.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, he grew up in that, and with Frank.
Marshall Davis.
Marshall Davis. Okay.
Yeah.
Given that, what was Barack Obama's job before he got into politics? We all know what it was. It was what? Community organizer.
Right.
Who defined community organizer?
So-
Reed Saul Alinsky,
Yeah.
Rules for Radicals. He
Right.
is the one that defined the job. The job of a community organizer to get in and create havoc.
Right.
Period.
Right.
He never intended to heal anybody.
No.
My opinion now, he never intended to heal anybody. He's a Manchurian candidate, or whatever we don't want to call it, to go in there and cause havoc.
That's right.
And that's exactly what he did.
And speaking of Bill Ayers, my humble contribution to Obamology was I was the first one to deduce that Bill Ayers was the co-author of Dreams from My Father.
Yep.
And this happened, and there's a story here, because I did this in September 2008. And then I went to the major conservative publications and said, listen, to make my case, I need a lot of words. I need 3,500 words, 5,000 words max. Turned down Weekly Standard, National Review, American Spectator, right? Even though I used to write for all of them at one time or another. And so finally I did it in the American Thinker, which I'd never written for before, and I've been writing for them ever since. And that day, this is a funny experience, when Rush Limbaugh starts talking to you about you on his show, your life changes. You know, my inbox fills up, my email box fills up, and it's a month before the election. And if I could, and as David Remnick, one of the David biographers, said, and he attacked me viciously as a racist, as they all did. Why else would I do this? People have been writing that Shakespeare didn't write Hamlet for the last 400 years without being called a racist. But to challenge Obama's literary genius, you're a racist. What else could you be? And that scares off a lot of would-be challengers. So, so that I had a month before the election. All I need, and I would go, I had a few good supporters, and they'd say, well, let us show you the evidence. You don't have to believe me, just look at the evidence yourself. See what conclusion you come to. Okay, they both use matching nautical metaphors 53 times in their books, but it's a coincidence, etc. Up and down. I mean, I do 20 different proofs. No one wanted to hear about it on our side, because they had already resigned themselves to a loss. They were already packing their bags and leaving Washington. So he went on to win. Remnick says, if this were believed by enough people, it would have been the end of his candidacy, if the Ayers had written the election.
Do you remember what the journal, I can't remember the journal's name, from the LA Times referred to Barack Obama is? Remember the
right, the magic Negro, right?
Because he said he would make white people feel comfortable with their prejudices. Right?
Yeah.
And that was a liberal, by the way, a liberal leftist journalist.
Right, absolutely right. And then in David Garrow's book, and David Garrow's a bold guy for a leftist, open leftist. I'll get you 1 second. And Pulitzer Prize winner. He was the one who broke the story about, and this is, I'm getting a little off topic, but he was Martin Luther King's primarily biographer. And he broke the story last year that King, because he had gotten the hold of the FBI records, that King was more than just a philanderer. He was in the Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby mold of sexual predators. He said it's enough to rewrite his history. The major media suppressed the story. They said, well, you just have the notes, not the tapes. Well, and he says, listen, these are notes written contemporaneously by FBI agents. They're not going to say something that's not in the tapes that people could listen to. But he's that bold. So about Obama, and he's also a meticulous researcher, and he's a leftist. He goes in and goes into the Obama neighborhood. And Obama dismissed Bill Ayers as some guy who lived in my neighborhood, if you recall, during the debate. And he was a terrorist bomber in the 70s. He gets in there and says, the Ayers and Bill Ayers and Bernardine Dohrn were having dinner almost nightly with Barack and Michelle up until the time he was elected to the Senate. And the third member of that party was Rashid Khalidi, who was a PLO advocate and supporter. And this is the way the media worked, though. So when Khalidi has his going away dinner, sometime I think it was in 2003, and from Chicago, Obama's there, Ayers is there. They give, testimonials. The LA Times gets a hold of the tape and refuses to share it with anyone. Right? That's the way they roll. Only if Donald Trump had that kind of protection, he'd be on Mount Rushmore already. So, anyone else? Yes, David.
Jack, we were talking, I think, 2 years ago at one of your summer parties, which I'm sorry you will not be having this.
Yeah, I'll tell you why in a minute. You know why, but
about and I see this all the time, and I see it even in the group here, about how so-called right-wingers simply don't understand Lenin and his political methodology, and as a result they lose the argument over and over because they fall into the Leninist trap of succumbing to name-calling and thinking that arguments will carry the day, when in fact it's about emotions, et cetera, et cetera. And you talked about the Sacco Vanzetti trial,
right,
when the American Communist Party trapped conservative Republicans, and they've been doing it ever since. And people, for example, I love when I hear, I'm not getting the shot because, well, don't say because, just say, I'm not getting the shot.
Period.
That's nobody's business when you're not getting the shot.
Right, fear is the real virus. Yeah.
You're saying I have to have a reason for not getting it. You're falling into the Leninist trap.
Right. No, that's well, yeah, it's a good point. In fact, the Sacco and Vanzetti was a century ago when they killed a Massachusetts payroll clerk who was also Italian. Was the beginning of the imposition of of race onto the judicial process, at least formally at a high level. And and then Obama, though, was responsible for a twist in that whole paradigm, because up until, for the first 80 or so years, what they did with the left would take a guilty party, like Sacco and Vanzetti were conspicuously guilty, and pretend they were innocent, and then drum up worldwide support to, all over the world for protesting their execution.
Floyd.
Yeah, now that's exactly come full circle. However, now, and this started in 2012 with the death of Trayvon Martin in Sanford, Florida. They were no longer interested in portraying the guilty as innocent. They were prepared to portray the innocent as guilty. Yeah. And this is a dark turn. Because up until that time, you'd have the Rosenbergs, you'd have Alger Hiss, you'd have Mumia Abu Jamal, all these, Leonard Peltier, all these conspicuously guilty people. And the left would say they're innocent, they're innocent, they're innocent. Now with George Zimmerman, who I've gotten to know personally, I wrote a book on the case, he is, at the time, in 2012, he still is Hispanic. Spanish is his first language. A civil rights activist and an Obama supporter. He was having his head beaten to concrete for a minute, full minute, by a guy who was, can you believe this, a half a foot taller than he was? Trayvon Martin is a half a foot taller than George Zimmerman. He was an MMA fighter. And he was also into drugs, into burglary, into gambling, into guns, and into sex. He was 17 years old. His life had spun out of control because 2 years earlier, his father had abandoned his stepmother. Up until that point, he was the little kid you saw on the cover of People magazine. And then after that, he just turned bad, hard, and quick. And he was, a friend of mine, Joel Gilbert, made a brilliant documentary on this that's it's worth seeing. Yes, ma'am, in the back?
I have documentation at home, and this is no direct quote, but Obama stated that if the winds blew bad, that he was going to side with the Muslims, and our country didn't listen.
Yeah, he was, and that's another thing. I would, his Muslim roots, as one time he said, he was congratulating John McCain for not talking about his Muslim roots. You remember this? And then George Stephanopoulos corrects him. Oh, your Christian roots. Your Christian roots. Yeah. Actually, I would say he's no more a Muslim than he is a Christian, but he played to the Muslim world. He was constantly playing to the Muslim world.
You can't believe in the religion, right?
Yeah.
You have to be an atheist.
That's right. There's no right.
Just play that
Yeah.
because it works really well.
Well, he played Christian in Chicago because it got him a base in the community, and then he played Muslim on the world stage. So he's like Zelig in the movie. I don't know if you've ever seen that Woody Allen movie where he blends in and becomes everyone who's around him. So, no, he's an incredible character. Actually, not a very interesting character, except that he reflects so much of what the world wants him to reflect. He's so much a thing. Going back to my event, I have, for about the last 12 years, I've had an event in my, I have a place on Lake Erie. And there's a wonderful irony here. And this is how, I don't believe climate change scientists, but sometimes I fall for their elixirs. I remember reading in 2000, as late as 2013, the science of climate change was saying Lake Erie was shrinking, right? And my house is right on Lake Erie. So I'm thinking, gosh, if the beach gets too big, I could lose my view. How's that for a first world self-indulgence? Well, because my in-laws had a place out there in the 30s. And I've seen pictures of Lake Erie in the 30s, which was the hottest decade in American history. And the beach went out from my place about a couple hundred yards. There were trees on it. In the 30 years I've had the place, the beach is typically about 100 feet wide. And I had a bank. And the bank had never been touched by a wave, a hard wave. And so my neighbors wanted to put in a seawall. I said, why would you put in a wall for? I've been here 30 years. And the science of climate change says the lake is shrinking, right? Well, and now, David, it comes to why I'm not having my thing this year is because I've lost a third of my lawn, and I have to put a wall in. The science. You go back and you read these articles. It's in Science magazine, National Geographic, not serious journals allegedly, and they're saying first of all, shrinking, seesawing because of climate change, and then because of climate change, growing. So I couldn't. I was thinking whether I should build a wall. There is no one in the climate science community I could turn to and get a straight answer as to whether this lake is shrinking or growing, because they have no idea. And if you needed proof that the whole thing is a fraud, Obama will be celebrating his 60th birthday party at his $12 million Martha's Vineyard home, beachfront home, and Martha's Vineyard. And by the way, he's just right down the street from the climate czar who has a $12 million home, John Kerry, right? Right. So, as someone said when he bought the home, and this is kind of funny, and we would get it. There are people who didn't even get it. He goes, "Well, I guess Obama did keep the oceans from rising." As he goes in when he won the nomination in 2008, he said, "This is the moment when the oceans stop rising." So it's a great scam, and I'm an optimist. I don't think they'll get away with it perpetually. I think, yes, sir.
Part of the scam, from what I understand, for people that own properties along the lake, is the fact that Obama turned around and made a deal with the Canadians, and they didn't let the water out that they usually let out in Montreal, and that's what causes constant thing with the water coming your way.
Well, yeah, there's rumors about that. I don't know.
It'll be Lake Ontario.
That'd be Lake Ontario. There was.
We had. I'm right on the lake too, so we're gonna have to compare notes. But so last year was the highest water in about 35 years. I got the USGA stuff for each of the lakes.
Yeah.
But it was really high last year.
Yes.
But it was excessively high in Lake Ontario.
Right.
Because of the falls. What happens to us is irrelevant to other than how much water goes to the falls. Lake Ontario does what it does because it's on the other side. And its level is controlled by the dams, the hydro dams up there. So there could be some truth to that, I don't know. But those hydro dams do control the level of St. Lawrence.
And Ontario got hit hardest and first. And where on the lake are you?
Silver Creek.
Okay, yeah. I'm on the other side of Dunkirk. I'm south of Dunkirk. So, yeah, well.
Derek Bell, the originator of CRT here in the U.S.
Yes.
In relation to Jeremiah Wright and Obama, he was Obama's spiritual advisor. Somebody said, I think it was journalist David Pollack said, what Jeremiah Wright was to Obama spiritually, Derek Bell was to Obama academically.
Right.
Do you have any comments on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, Obama, Derek Bell was the man when Obama and Michelle went to Harvard Law School. In fact, I just visited, a friend was making a documentary on Michelle's life. And that was a funny documentary. And I was just at Princeton the other day because we were talking about her Princeton experience. Neither one of them belonged in the Ivy League. And so they get to a place like Harvard. And this is, Michelle Obama is brighter than Michelle anyhow. I mean, here's what we know about Michelle. As she admits, she doesn't test well and she didn't get good grades. But she knew she could succeed at Princeton. So she goes to Princeton, and sure enough, she succeeds. How about that? If your papers begin as an angry black woman, blah 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 blah, you're not going to get an F. She writes a senior thesis, in which Christopher Hitchens, the late Christopher Hitchens, says it can't be read because it was written in no known language. And he wasn't being terribly unkind. And then she gets to Harvard after this. And at Harvard, I looked up this, what you need to get in. You have to have at least a 98% on your LSATs and 3.9 or more in your grades. But neither she nor Obama were anywhere near that. So what happens when you get into it's like being Bart Simpson at Genius School. At least Bart knew he was in over his head. And he would admit it. He had no way to deal with it other than to get out. But Barack and Michelle, they're comforted by people like Derek Bell, who tell them if you're not doing well, if you're not understanding the subject matter, if you think your classmates are getting ahead of you, it's because this whole system is rigged. That's all about systemic racism, and the law is racist. The professors are racist. Everyone's racist, and if you don't succeed, it's because of that.
And that comes right out of critical theory.
Right.
Critical race theory
Right, sure.
is one of the 8 subcategories in critical theory.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what critical theory starts with.
Right. No, exactly. And it's what it does. It's justified for people like the Obamas, the incredible gravy train of their lives. From Punahou to Occidental, which is the priciest school on the West Coast, to Columbia University, to Harvard, to the White House, Obama has ridden his race. If his father was from Kentucky and not Kenya, and his name was O'Connor, not Obama, he'd be lucky to be a state senator and a University of Chicago at Illinois, University of Illinois Chicago graduate. That was his trajectory. If that weren't for that factor, and yet, at least acknowledge it. At least express gratitude for the system that has allowed you to slide like this. No, you have to pretend that you didn't get there that way. You had to pretend that this was all justly deserved because you're a literary genius, right? Even though you didn't write your own book. So there we stand here in 2021.
Why wouldn't he release his academic records?
Because, by the way, he did graduate from Columbia. I've seen the program. I've seen a literal graduation program. He didn't graduate with honors. Now, you don't graduate from Columbia without honors and get into Harvard. He was, one guy is on tape, he was in fact his Alinskyite mentor back in Chicago, bragging to his little class he was teaching how he knew Obama, and how Obama was always a middling student, not much of a student. So there is a whole lot of Asian Americans with grades through the roof that can't get into Harvard, but Barack Obama did, and good. So did Michelle.
But if that's the case, then I don't get how he got in. If there's all these people oppressing him all the time, does that?
Well, you're asking for logic in the CRT. There is none, right?
Does anybody follow Dr. James Lindsay?
Is he that wrote critical theory? Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, read the book.
Follow Dr. James Lindsay. He is amazing.
Yeah.
He's a leftist. He is a liberal.
Yeah.
But he's a traditional liberal.
Classical.
And that's a better term. But anyway, he is exposing it. But he's so incredibly intelligent. I have to just listen and just really focus on him, because he'll tell you that basically what they're doing with critical race theory is they're interjecting critical race theory as a virus. And what they do is the virus goes into the colleges. They indoctrinate the college students, and then they put the college students, they're the virus. They go out into the media, other colleges, all of that, and they infect. And that's exactly what critical race theory is.
It's in our military.
Yeah, it's in the military. It's certainly at the top. It's interesting is that one of the side benefits of the COVID meltdown. By the way, I launched Kansas City's first protest on the first day of the shutdown, but without a lot of support, I will say, on the first day. But while people were working at home, especially fathers, they got to hear the crap their kids were being fed.
That's right, yes.
And that's why it exploded this year. They've been force feeding this to kids in grade schools probably for 5 or 10 years, and universities for 50.
That's right.
And now it's so heartening to see people from all over the country standing up and demanding its elimination, and certain governors doing the same.
The pernicious thing about critical theory is that it's a number one assertion, if you like philosophy. Its primary assertion is that there is no such thing as reason, and there is no such thing as objective truth.
Right.
Therefore, everyone is allowed to have their own subjective truth, and you're not allowed to question it, of course, unless your question is conservative.
Right.
But that's the pernicious thing. So right away, they wipe out any idea for them to still say, well, science or math are just arbitrary social constructs
Right.
devised by Western civilization to hold down other people. Now, I found that amusing because every time I look at test results, kids from India and China are kicking our asses in math and science.
Yeah, right.
So I'm not actually sure how that works. But the point, that's the pernicious thing, is they're trying to undo 1,000 years almost of human enlightenment.
Right.
Right? And scientific method, and truly understanding the universe as it is. They're trying to undo that and put us back into the medieval times, right?
Right.
The Stone Age in our thinking. Whatever you want to believe is okay. I wonder how that works when you need a triple bypass
Yeah.
to go to the witch doctor. But I'm just,
Just by the way, the phrase "my truth"
Yeah.
hurts my head as
oh,
much
that's
as
terrible. That's awful.
hurts my head as much as his husband.
Apparently,
I'm a tolerant guy, but I will never be able to bring myself to say his husband.
My pronoun is them.
Yes, sir.
In your book, you talk a bit about the Tea Party and how Obama was obsessed with the Tea Party.
Oh, totally.
Elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I know. And it was, there are two villains in this book, and Obama's memoir, his 2020 memoir. One, of course, is Donald Trump. The other one took me by surprise. I think it took a lot of people by surprise. The bête noire of his book, the one who unleashed the dark spirits, that's his phrase, in the Republican Party, was Sarah Palin. And, I've only been to one convention. I went in 2008. And I was meeting with a few friends up here, and I remember driving back. I was driving back to go to St. Paul for the convention, and my one friend called and said, "How did you know?" I said, "How did I know what?" I said, "How did you know he was going to pick Sarah Palin?" Because no one had ever heard of her. And I'd said this in about June of 2008. I said, well, actually it was a good guess, but that's all right. I don't say that. I just know. I know these things. Sarah and I talk all the time, But I go to the convention. I wouldn't have gone if McCain had picked Joe Lieberman, as he was threatening to do. That would have been the end of the Republican Party, the end of any meaningful opposition. But he picked Sarah Palin, and she stole the show at the convention. She was brilliant. And Obama talks about this. He acknowledged that much. He was sung. He was upstaged. And for a little while, until her Lincoln Project handlers began to corrode her viability, she had the possibility of pulling McCain across the finish line. But it didn't happen. But for whatever reason, she got under Barack's skin, just like Trump did, and she becomes the force that unleashes the Tea Party, which, from his perspective now, thanks to Michelle, is totally racist from top to bottom.
Jack, what's your over-under on when, and I'm serious, Joe Biden will lapse?
To pick a vice president or to pick a president, you need confirmation from both bodies. So Nixon was sort of hamstrung. So he had to pick the person that the House wanted, the least likely Republican to give them any trouble. It was one of their own, Gerald Ford. So in so they have Gerald Ford in place, so now they can move against Nixon. Because they couldn't move it against Nixon with Spiro Agnew in place. So they move against Nixon in 74. And by the way, this was shades of the Russia hoax. With the Watergate is not. I just helped edit a major book on Watergate, and it's not what you think it was. But Nixon is forced out in 74, and then now Gerald Ford, by the 25th Amendment, automatically ascends to the presidency. The vice president, that's automatic. Now, again, they have to pick a new vice president, and you still have the House and Senate controlled by the left, and so who do they pick? The most leftist Republican in America, Nelson Rockefeller. So what's going to happen now, the Democrats are in a bind, because if they're going to move, they better move now when they control both houses.
That's right.
So they could, if they take Biden out, they'll push Kamala up. Automatically, that happens. She's a disaster. They know it. So what will matter is who they put in as VP.
Yeah, they'll replace her before they move him out to the 25th Amendment.
That could happen, right? Yeah. So,
Where's Hillary?
Yeah.
and that's I would say the two most likely candidates now are Michelle and Hillary, you know, and I'm not sure which one is scarier.
But here's an
We got,
interesting
wait, Mike, just a minute. We got 5 minutes. Joe, did you have a comment, a question you wanted to ask?
Oh, yeah. In your opinion, what's going on in the world today, critical race theory, entitlements, it seems like Page is taken right out of the, and I might mispronounce it, forward pivot in 1960.
Oh, sure, right,
I
right.
mean, you know, for people to say this is just happening right now in these last 5 years, this has been in the days.
Yeah, so Cloward Pittman theory is basically,
The schools,
yeah.
control the schools, and control the kids. And then we get the kids into the colleges, and those kids come out.
And part of their theory is you overload the system, and the system breaks, and then you reconstruct it, and it's the only thing now that justifies what they're doing at the southern border.
Exactly. Oh, my
Yeah,
God.
yeah.
Just one other question, going back about Barack Obama. Way back when Cuomo started the SAFE Act, I went to a big rally out in Albany and bus ride out there. I'll never ride a bus again. I watched a lot of interesting documentaries, and one of them, have you ever heard or comment on the one called Lies of My Father? It was mocking out his book, and they went into detail about what we're talking about, the Kenyan thing, and how the Kenyan was actually a surrogate father. The real father, I'm going from memory from 12 years ago, the real father was a Marxist, that the grandfather, now, I don't know how true this is on it.
Are you thinking of Dreams from My Real Father, that movie?
I think it's called Lies of My
Oh,
Father.
Lies of My Father. Okay, yeah, Frank Marshall Davis was his Marxist communist. I mean, he's a CPUSA member, mentor in Hawaii. By the way, Frank Marshall Davis does not make it into this book. He's mentioned more times in Dreams from My Father as Frank than anyone other than a family member. And now he was totally purged from this book. And the media still, if you said Frank Marshall Davis in a New York Times newsroom, they'd say, who? They don't know. So that's the way it is. Hey, I know I've probably gone along, Mel.
No, I want to make sure everybody got a chance to ask a question who hasn't been able to ask
Okay,
one yet.
okay.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Have you read the case against Obama
I,
as he was coming in for the presidency there?
I'm not sure I've read that book, but I'm familiar with it.
If anybody had read that, they never would have voted for him.
No, it's, a lot of people, right, some people would because they just want power, but there are a lot of disappointed Democrats. I mean, here's what happened. Why the Democrats are disappointed, because during his tenure, they lost control of 13 state legislators, 13 governorships, and something like 850 state house and senate seats. It was a disaster for the Democrats. Now they have managed to get power back by hook and by crook, but it's not going to last. They're living on lies, and you can only live that so long on lies. I think. Anyhow, we'll see what happens.
Do you think that everything that's being done right now, Mike Lindell exposing the China interference in the election, the Maricopa County audits, other places doing the audits, Pennsylvania, I think, Georgia's talking about it. Do you think it'll just go nowhere?
You know, that's a good question. By the way, my contribution was to buy 4 of my pillows.
Oh, yeah. That man he's all in.
He's a hero. He really is.
He is.
And he sacrificed his whole business model in a way. But here, you know, let's say, for instance, a couple things. There's also the Durham report, which is still out there.
Oh, I know. I think that's very.
The Durham report could come back in and say this was a massive crime against the president, that we have indictments against Comey and Brennan, who's the ringleader, and Clapper and all these people. And that'd be out of the news cycle in a day. You know, I mean, they would just bury it. Just like if Maricopa County is shown to be total fraud, the major media now is so totally in, they'll bury it. But I would like one state. All we need is one state. Then we end up, we dispel the lie, the big lie phrase and all that stuff. Then we look at the guys, and I wrote this on the day after January 6th. I said one day we're going to be looking at January 6th the way the French look at July 14th. And my editors cut that line out. But I think I'm right. So, yes.
Anybody else who hasn't had a chance? All right. Well, Jack,
Mel.
thank you so much.
No, thanks for having me.
Oh, it's been
Appreciate
great.
it. It's- You know, it's really refreshing to talk to people who know the basis, you know, before you walk into a room. So you're a great crowd, and it's a great group. And I am so heartened when I see groups like yours, you know, meeting across America. And the Tea Party was the most significant grassroots movement of my life, political grassroots movement. And I'd love to see it kept alive, even though the IRS tried its best to destroy it in 2010. So, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
All right. Remember, you guys
By the
come.
way, $20 a piece and signed copy.
So right up here, right up front.
$28 at retail. So there you go.